Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay, it's our first roundtable of the year, which means we're going to go back to a year. Usually we went 20 years. This time we're going back 30 years. So get out your AARP cards, your canes for walking, put your teeth back in. It's time to talk about 1991 albums. Some people chimed in, Jay, that they weren't even born when this year happened.
No.
And I think we should be penalizing them in some way for pointing that out. But
I think they're liars. It's impossible.
Yeah, I know. Everybody was born by 1991. That's just a fact. There's nobody younger than that. Jay, 1991, yes. Is it the most pivotal year in all the 1990s as far as music goes?
Well, doing my research for this episode, I'd have to say yes. In fact, I think we could probably do an episode on every month and have plenty to talk about.
Let's do that. We're starting with
lay it out.
January.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I know.
There's definitely a story there. More so than maybe any other year that we've talked about. So I'm excited to do it.
So we threw it out to the Patreon community and said, hey, who wants to join us? And we got a whole bunch of people, some returning folks, some old friends, some new friends. Let's go around the room. Center square. We've got Marissa Bucksbaum back. Hi, Marissa.
Hey. Pivotal year. And this is also a pivotal year. It's. I feel like that's a nice bit of symmetry.
It is. I'm going to go alphabetical from B. Then, well, I've done this before and it doesn't go well. But from B, we go to G. Jeff Gentis. Welcome to your first Zoom with us, Jeff.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, everybody.
Where are you at? What part of the country?
I'm in Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Oh, yeah. Cool. We've never had anybody from Connecticut.
We can mark
that
off now.
Where in Connecticut? New Haven?
No, I'm up on the Mass border, in between Hartford and Springfield. So yeah, I was 13 in 1991, and I think that's was really when I was able to start making my own CD purchases and so fond memories.
Yep.
Yes. And then we have H. H comes after G, right? Scott Hallgrim.
Yes. Hey, yeah. So 1991. I'm dialing in from San Diego right now because I wised up. But in 1991, I was in Minneapolis, and like a lot of you, it was a pivotal year for me. 16, turning 17, making a lot of my own decisions about music and coming into my own. I went from my own dirtball suburban high school into a arts high school that defined who I am today 30 years later. It can't possibly be 30 years later. Can it? Please, God, tell me it's not.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. From north of the border, Mr. Johnny Hooper. Johnny, tell us, were you of buying CD purchasing age in 1991?
Most definitely.
Okay, thank God.
15, turning 16.
Okay, all right.
I want to know if anybody else was still getting some cassettes here and there because they became so cheap by this point.
Yeah.
Okay. Got a couple hands. I had to stretch my money as far as it would go. So there would be sometimes I go to the store and be like, all right, I got enough for one CD and 2 cassettes now because the cassettes only cost whatever it was, $6.99 or something.
Yep.
This was the time I would keep getting like sampler cassettes, like albums or labels were putting out, like 6 songs or whatever on their cassettes.
Yep. Chip Midnight. I know for a fact that in 1991, you were probably buying a buttload of CDs.
I was. 1991 was.
Or getting them free.
Yes, probably my. It was the start of. It's probably the reason I'm here tonight. I was 1991 spreads across 2 school years, so it was 1 year ended in May of 91, and the next year started in September 91. I started off the year writing for the Ohio State paper as a sophomore, interviewing Joey Ramone for my first interview ever, and ended the year going to see Nirvana and going from reading Hit Parader, Metal Edge, Circus, and Rip to reading Alternative Press and Spin. So yeah, 91 was pivotal. Got my writing start and saw a ton of really amazing bands that year.
Was that the famed Stashes show, or was it a different one?
It was a Stashes show.
Yes.
It was the year I interviewed Blind Melon. It was, a lot of things I've talked about on the show before happened. Started in 91.
Mr. Eric Peterson, where were you at this time, 1991?
So I graduated from Punk Rock High School USA in the spring of 1991. I was 18 years old. And then I went off to as far away as I could get from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and still go to university in the state of Michigan. I went to Lake Superior State University that August and stayed there for a year and a half. But my friends and I were definitely into music. We watched Headbangers Ball. We watched 120 Minutes. My high school yearbook from that year, which came out in, let's say, March of 91, there's a picture of a kid in a Mudhoney t-shirt, if that gives you any kind of clue what was in the air. I was not privy to that. We were still wrapped up in 4 years of having listened to Metallica and the Red Hot Chili Peppers being the two massive bands in my high school. And of course, as always, the running joke every year was that the song for each year was Stairway to Heaven. So there was still a lot of classic rock floating around. Mm-hmm. And then I also have friends who have stories about running into bands like Soundgarden and Screaming Trees around town because they would all play here. So it's definitely a pivotal year for a lot of reasons. Now, Chip, you mentioned giving up on reading Rip magazine. Rip magazine, as I recall, was actually one of the first of the big magazines to really zero in on the grunge scene and focus on them, and were huge supporters. And they were really a strange magazine in that, yes, they covered a lot of metal and pop metal, but they also covered a lot of punk. I think their first issue had like Motley Crue and the Ramones. Yeah. And early issues had, Black Flag, the Dead Kennedys, and Poison and Warrant. So
I actually think you're right. I think Rip was one that made the entire year. I think I read that the entire year.
Rip is one of those magazines that I really wish somebody would put the whole archive up online somewhere or put out a ROM or something, because it really did bridge that whole era. And I remember issues with Animal Bag and Paw and Soundgarden and, right alongside your Firehouse and your Mr. Biggs, which, is a really interesting juxtaposition.
Rip deserves a lot of credit there, including, it's hard to distinguish the magazine from Lon M. Friend. Mm-hmm. But I remember even to go back a couple of years in 1989, they were a magazine that said, Band of the Year, Album of the Year is Faith No More, The Real Thing. And they went on that road, which was, to be clear, that was a big hit, but to go out and say, this is the direction that things are going, I think says a lot about like where things went in 1990, 91, 92, and so on. I think they were clearly my reading material of preference at this time.
And for those who can't imagine a world before the internet, it was like Rip was, they had at the beginning, I think it was called, I don't remember what it was called, New Blood maybe, or there was like a one page, there's like 4 or 5 pages that featured like a new band. And to Eric's point, like you would see a South Gang and then you'd see a Mind Funk, like these two completely opposite bands. And they were just spotlighting new bands. And like I said, there's no internet to go sample songs and stuff. So I used Rip a lot when I'd go to stores. I'd be like, I saw those guys in Rip in the Fresh Blood or New Blood or whatever their section was called. If we had enough time, I could probably run back in my archives and pull out a couple old rips and see what it was called.
Well, they also had one page where they reviewed demos. So bands just starting out. And that's where I heard of bands like the Fire Ants, which was made up of Andrew Wood's brothers. And it wasn't a big write-up. It was just this band from this area. They sound like blah. here's their mailing address if you want to try to write to them.
That's cool.
Wow. Hey, last but not least, Whitney Bueller, and of course I messed up the alphabetical thing because I saw Wit.
It's my own fault. I didn't. Put
I
my
saw
last name in
Wit,
there.
and I thought W. And
Well, honestly, I was just, I got, like I said, new computer and no camera. I look like a real party pooper, but
how do you got a new computer without a camera? How
I
is that
built it
possible?
myself and I forgot to buy the camera. Yeah, no, I actually am not on camera because I don't want to see how anyone to see me, how I've been ravaged by COVID. No, that's probably not a good joke to make. Me and what did you post, Tim, today? Liam Gallagher's house was hot, so he decided that he had COVID or something.
Yeah.
I got a charge out of that. Yeah, so 1991. Yeah, so I was already 25. Minneapolis, I think Scott mentioned the Twins won World Series. That was great. Actually, I didn't really prep anything because I was just going to listen. But
Okay?
I fell into the Nirvana thing and all of that. I didn't care for Pearl Jam much, but got swept up by the whole grunge thing, of course.
Yeah, I feel like my experience with this, and Jay, you probably have something similar in terms of this was the weird crossover year where I remember I was a senior, fall of 91, spring of 92. And we had a lounge. It was called the Senior Lounge in our cafeteria, and only the seniors were allowed in there. And it had a ping pong table, and it had a radio with a CD player. And the only two CDs, or actually only three CDs that got played for most of the fall were Nevermind and Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. It basically just went back and forth. Whoever was controlling the ping pong table would decide, what CD they were going to play. And that was pretty much it for the fall. And that kind of sums up, I feel like, a lot of this era, which is the cross pollination, not cross pollination, but we think of the 90s as sort of like a dead end for 90s metal, or 80s metal, but it really wasn't. There was this long period where these things were happening at the same time. And it kind of culminated with that fall of 91.
It actually culminated on September 24th.
Yes.
When Nevermind, Bad Motorfinger, and Blood Sugar Sex Magic all came out on the same day.
So I have a question about that. When did the singles for that drop? Because in the last couple of days thinking about this, it suddenly occurred to me that in those days you'd listen to the radio and they would have the singles for these songs 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks earlier than the albums came out, or MTV would, have the video and be showing the video a couple of weeks before the actual album came out. And that doesn't even occur to me in 2021,
Yep.
Because of streaming and YouTube and all of those things. But
right.
Yeah, that's true. They would use MTV to kind of build up the album release and drive sales. And that was definitely the case for Guns N' Roses, right? I mean, I remember the first video was out months and months before the records were.
And was that first video tied into Terminator 2?
It's True Lies, I think, right?
No, it was
Or
Terminator 2 because Arnold comes
Oh,
out.
you're right.
You Could Be Mine.
Yeah.
You Could Be a Mayan.
I know Smells Like Teen Spirit was released 2 weeks before.
Yeah.
And that, I'm not sure about the other two albums.
Use Your Illusion and Ozzy's No More Tears came out on the same day because I stood at a midnight sale for those.
Yep.
Remember those?
Those are all the week September 17th.
Oh, I share a birthday with an Ozzy record.
It's an interesting, so I create a little timeline just to kind of visualize this because I wanted to get this straight in my head. And a lot of stuff I think that Eric and Scott were talking about on Patreon, really, you can see it visually. First off, the first half of the year, there's not as many releases. So there's just less material, it seems, at least for the stuff that we're talking about. And then there's from the summer to October, a ton. September just has a ton of releases. So there's just more stuff released, but there's a definite line where you see, Great White and White Lion and Skid Row and Van Halen and David Lee Roth. They all put albums out either somewhere between January and July. And then none of those bands other than Guns N' Roses released anything. Like they just, for whatever reason, like this release schedule, they were like all front load, maybe because they wanted to do summer tours because they were already established. And then they don't release, those established bands don't release anything except for maybe Guns N' Roses and Metallica. And then you get all of this new material from, you know, bands that maybe weren't as established or for whatever reason was pushed to the last quarter or the third quarter of the year. And there's something about that potentially, like where it's interesting to think about from a business standpoint, like how much of that orchestrated what we then experience is like this light going on, like this dramatic shift just between like how things were coordinated because of, you know, whatever marketing and business schedules. And then I'm sure once they saw that success, we're like, well, shit, next year we're spending all our money on these bands. We're not going to put money back into the bands and, you know, that we put money in January that didn't do anything.
So if I can jump in here, that leads into one of the things I wanted to talk about. Lon Friend actually on Headbangers Ball, this was his pick of the week. This is the Galactic Cowboys self-titled record. So the story is that this album was delayed for 9 to 12 months of release because Geffen, which is the label, wanted to put their resources into promoting the new Guns N' Roses, and that once Guns N' Roses came out, this was going to be their big priority. So this comes out in August of 1991. However, Nirvana blows up and Geffen, of course, starts to switch gears. Now, this record has songs called I'm Not Amused, My School, Why Can't You Believe in Me, Captain Crude, Someone for Everyone, Kill Floor, Speak to Me. So there's a whole bunch of songs about angst and being a teenager and not fitting in and all of the stuff those grunge albums were about. Captain Crude is about the Exxon Valdez incident. Kill Floor is about the dehumanization of working in a slaughterhouse. So
I still can't believe that band is on Geffen. I mean,
Yeah.
They did nothing but had nothing but bad luck, them and King's X, their entire careers. And I'm like, I cannot believe the story behind that. I've heard that story too. So thanks for mentioning
So this
that.
is their single, I'm Not Amused. So they have a song about environmentalism and not fitting in a high school. And the single, and you got to go in Discogs and look at the photos of this single. I mean, this is like 1991 space age jets and stuff. This song is about how they're not amused with all of the Satanism that's in heavy metal. All the fake, they're not like, you know, prudes about it. They're just saying it's gone too far. It's not funny anymore. It's not fun. And I'm like,
well, they kind of became prudes later. I mean,
yeah, they did. Yeah. But it's like, how can this be the single when you have all of that other stuff to pull from? So also the album production is way too slick, in my opinion. I feel like it could have been more raw, but this is Geffen obviously not knowing that Nirvana was going to blow up, that this was the old normal of, you know, heavy metal that's well produced, that's maybe a little bit off, you know, left to center. These guys should have been, you know, touring with Metallica. They should have been with Pantera, who they were friends with, but no, they get sent out with Dream Theater. And I like Dream Theater, but wrong audience.
I saw them open for Overkill.
Okay. So, and Dio was another one that they played with. And it's kind of like all of the marketing decisions were wrong. And they never corrected from when things changed, and they could have been like, oh, let's go with the environmental song. Let's go with the you know, the one about the Exxon Valdez, because that's what Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam are talking about. Not fitting in a high school. Let's go with that song. No, they go with the, you know, the Satanic Panic one. So
the other thing, and we'll get into it here, but just from a high level on the timeline, that's interesting is that, again, in that first 6 months of the year, you do see a lot of like Jesus Jones and KLF and Saigon Kick and Throwing Muses, and like there's these bands where they're different, they're alternative, they don't quite fit. Some of them have hits, but they don't quite break through yet. And some of them get another pass, like once September happens, and then that all takes off. Some of those bands, like obviously Dinosaur Jr., now all of a sudden becomes a lot more relevant because even though, you know, Green Mind's a favorite or fan favorite. It is not like the big MTV hit. They get another cycle, some of those bands, because they basically catch onto the flywheel of alternative after September happens. But it's interesting, like I think we've talked about it in the past, of just some of those bands, like Jesus Jones is one that pops to mind, where it's like, okay, this is really different. And like MTV pushed it a lot, but then they never really went anywhere. And you're like, oh yeah, and you kind of forget that happened. You're like, oh yeah, that was a thing. And I would always get the timeline confused of like, was that late 80s or when was that? And it was like January to whatever, March of this year.
You see EMF put out an album Unbelievable that year too.
Yep.
Was that also Soup Dragons? Was that period around then as well? Because I feel like there was all these like British bands that were sort of
Hot Wired or that whatever that album is.
Yeah, they had it was like the KLF, EMF, Soup Dragons, Jesus Jones. They were all in this like they all had. I didn't know what at the time, but they all had sort of this tangential connection to like Manchester, with Primal Scream and those bands, and it was just basically built around like big beats and hooks and stuff like that, with totally coming out of left field, because in the United States we have no idea that that's going on unless you're like really tuned in to in 1990 and 1991 paying attention to that. This is before a lot of stuff.
When did 808 States record that year come out? Was that first half or second half? I'd be curious to know. Or like the Mock Turtles, because they released their second album before they imploded. But that was all across the pond. So
if I had thought about it, I would have looked at the 120-minute archive to see when some of those bands, because that's where they lived, at least on MTV, to see where they would have had videos played, what months and what which ones.
Jay, I don't know if you came across this when you were looking at the timeline, and I find this a little bit hard to believe, knowing the way release schedules work. Like anything after October is usually, at least back in the day, was reserved for greatest hits or live albums. It was the Christmas stocking stuffer. Don't try to push out a new band at the end of the year. But I saw it two different places, and like I said, I find this hard to believe, but that Live released Mental Jewelry on December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
That seems really weird for a band to release an album on the last day of the year. Like that
wasn't that an EP? Or
no,
was that a full album?
That's a full album.
They had an EP around that time.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, that's the date I'm seeing, and there was only one other December album that I found that would be relevant to what we talked about, which was Monster Magnet. I mean, there's definitely a drop off of like things built to September and then things peel back, which would also make sense that all that material that was released in December then would have all of this airspace, basically, right? I mean, there's not a lot to program around. So it just gives them even more play, because now a lot of other people were releasing things.
What labels were those on? I want to say Monster Magnet was on A&M, but I don't know if that was on an indie at that time, or was that their major label record?
Live was on Radioactive, I think.
Okay.
Which was maybe an Interscope or Universal offshoot, I think. But actually, I might be mixing that up. I feel like they put out their first album, but
I think they did like a single or an EP that year that was more low key, like during the year, and then they put the record.
Say Operation Spirit, maybe.
But to your point, I think Eric, you made the point, right? Like that video was out probably in October.
Mm-hmm.
Caroline would put out the Monster Magnet record.
Okay, so Caroline was a major indie at the time. I don't know if they had ties to any majors. And I want to say that like White Zombie was on Caroline for a while, and the Misfits were somehow related to Caroline at one point.
Wasn't Smashing Pumpkins on Caroline for?
They might have been.
I believe the first record is a Caroline Virgin release.
There it is.
Can you confirm that, Mr. Hooper, as you pull out the reissue edition of Gish?
I can. Give me a second.
While we're doing that, Eric, with you mentioning the Galactic Cowboys is sort of a band that got disappeared in a way. Are there other bands that you guys or albums released in '91 that you think flew well under the radar that probably deserved to get a look? I I see some heads nodding. Throw some albums out there, folks, that you think, oh, this one totally deserves a second listen because people missed it the first time.
I don't know that it was missed per se, but because it came out in the first half of 1991, would have been overshadowed by Nevermind and 10 and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and everything that sort of hit, September onward, as Jay mentioned. School of Fish.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked to learn that record predated Nevermind, because it has the sound to it that suggests it was influenced by grunge in some way. But that I think was an April release. And it's one of my favorite albums to listen to. I know 3 Strange Days got a bit of airplay, and there was definitely a video associated with it. I have no memory of it. Full disclosure, I was born in 91, but I was 2 years old. So my digestion of 1991 was, its reverberations many years later. But it's a great full album experience. And in the 90s, albums were really hit or miss. You could get a ton of filler. You were locked into that format. And just from the intro into 3 Strange Days, the middle flows beautifully, and the ending track, Euphoria, is one of the most beautifully written alternative jangly pop rock songs that I've ever heard. And I listened to that record constantly at the beginning of this year, so I associate it with like the couple
I don't know if that's a year that the local in Columbus, Ohio alternative station CD 101 started, but I don't even think it's a running joke. Like 3 Strange Days has topped their listener call in. Like even now, like you'll see on Twitter, on Reddit, like CD 101's doing their top 100 of all times, and like everybody jumps in. Oh, I bet 3 Strange Days is #1 again. It's been like the #1 requested song, but it's probably because when the station started, they got so many calls, and even like years later, probably the number of calls have decreased over the year, so it still probably ranks up there with a lot of requests, just because it was like launched when the station launched.
Wasn't that one of Andy Man, who used to be the programming director? It was like one of his favorite songs as well.
Yeah, and they used to, if my memory serves correct, I feel like they almost felt like a local band. Like they seemed to play every time CD 101 did any sort of special spring break concert or CD 101 day or whatever event they had. I feel like School of Fish was in Columbus a lot. I never saw him on that tour. I didn't really get into him until the second record, but
yeah, I mean, the only negative thing I can say about that album is that it suffers from not having real drums. I can't stand the sound of early 90s programmed drums, or even late 90s programmed drums. I think the first Primitive Radio Gods record has the same issue. It's just this flat, soulless, like blemish on an otherwise beautiful piece of songwriting and instrumentation. But I do think it was criminally overlooked. So I hope that it will inspire some people who listen to this episode to go back and spin it again.
Yeah, I remember that very clearly, as being one of those songs again during that time period that radio, at least Cleveland radio, picked up a lot. It sounds like Columbus did too. And it definitely stood out. It didn't sound like anything else on the radio at the time. So again, it was one of those examples. MTV was doing that with some of these bands that we're talking about previously, like that's Atomic Dustbin. I remember them like appearing on MTV and be like, okay, this is different. But definitely like signaled something was going to happen, or something was changing.
Yeah. So in Minneapolis, it was played all the time too. And let's see, when was it? Did somebody just say it was in April that came out? That album?
I think it was.
Okay,
yeah.
so that's like 6 months ahead of Nirvana, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting because it's got that feel to it, kind of. I don't know. That's a great album, though. I really like that one. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, but you know what? That opening guitar riff of that song, it reminds me of "She's Got the Look." You know that Is that
Yeah,
Roxette?
that has a Minneapolis connection as well. Yeah.
Oh, does it?
Well, it's somebody from Minneapolis went to Sweden. This is all apocryphal, but what I remember is somebody went from Minneapolis, went to Sweden, which in and of itself is not a story, but they picked up Roxette's cassette, came back, gave it to KDWB. Tell me if you remember this at all, Whitney. But and
yeah, 101.3 KDWB. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Roxette, their album Joyride came out in 1991.
Oh wow, that was played constantly in MTV.
Yes.
All the time. I think other things that might have been overlooked is that, you know, we talked about in 1990 and 1991, there were so many irons. Popular music had so many irons in the fire, if you want to look at it that way. And I think metal was going in a really interesting direction. And Prong put out Prove You Wrong on September 24th, and Corrosion of Conformity put out Blind on November 5th. And both of those got, again, like huge push in RIP, both in advertisement and review, and made a decent sized dent. But again, just got swallowed by everything else that happened in that year. But I still go back to Prove You Wrong and Blind. I think, did you guys review Blind like way back in the day?
Yes. Okay. Yep. And I feel like those are various like representational for like where metal would go the rest of the 90s. I think those two bands.
So we've talked about it before, but the narrative for a long time has been that Nirvana killed, you know, Motley Crue. The truth is that Metallica killed Motley Crue, and Anthrax and Pantera and every other, you know, dirgy, swampy, raw sounding metal band that came along slayed all of the poppy metal glam stuff.
Yeah.
They killed Enough's Enough. All right.
Yeah, they were.
I mentioned Strength as a hidden gem.
More than one person did. Yeah, that's a great album.
That is an absolutely killer record, and it got wasted by.
It's too long. It's too long. But
it's too long. You're right. They need to cut like 4 songs off it.
Yep.
So I think one of the stories of 91 is going to be that this is the turning point also of bands like Enough's Enough, or, you know, there's a whole list of bands that we could probably come up with that were pushed by their label to be the next Bon Jovi when they really wanted to be the next Motorhead. And finally in 91, when you get Metallica and you get Guns N' Roses and you get Nirvana and you get Soundgarden, that all of a sudden the A&R people are like, no. Let's let these bands do what they want, because, you know, trying to be the next Motley Crue is not working.
Could join the chorus for
December of 1991.
Sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
Say it again, Johnny.
What happens in December of 1991 that precedes what happens in September?
What happened in the summer?
Anyone?
Is it Lollapalooza?
Lollapalooza.
Yeah. The first touring incarnation of Lollapalooza, kicking off the alternative revolution.
Yeah, you can't really.
That major play on MTV.
Yeah,
that's so interesting. Like, because I think we mentioned some of us who were in high school. Like, you started the year, or I'm sorry, you ended the year one way, then the summer happens, and you have this big Lollapalooza thing, and then you come back, and all of these records are then released.
Yeah,
it never really occurred to me that's the way it had, because I was in a band at the time. I think it was my first band. Like, and we were like schizophrenic, trying to like. Some of us liked this, you know, the stuff we had talked about, like David Lee Roth and White Lion and stuff like that. And others of us were like more alternative already, like even before any of that happened, like into industrial music. So like when that happened, it kind of made it so that we could all like get along better. Just because you all had like we could all like get on the same page about Nirvana, right? We're all like, oh yeah, that's good. I like that. We could all get on the same page about Helmet. It's like, oh yeah, that song's really cool. Let's learn that song.
I think Tim has to be asked whether or not Nirvana killed road apples in early 1991. Right after Up to Here, come on, it was big, and then road apples. There you go. Then road apples got wasted too. We'll blame it on them.
Well, there's definitely a lull between Up to Here and then Fully Completely. Road Apples is a fine record, but it's not the advance that you would like them to make as a Tragically Hip fan. Jeff,
I
you were
felt
gonna...
like it just had to be a jab there somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. Jeff, what were you gonna say? You're gonna chime in?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I had the joining in on the School of Fish course. I had this 3 Strange Days as a single, and yeah, it definitely sounded different. It was, and it just weirdly faded away. And I looked them up. They're an LA band, at least the 2 primary members. I was a Ned's Atomic Dustbin fan, where I think they got caught up in the scene trying to change their sound, and then I don't think they put out about 4 more good songs after Godfather, but Godfather is great. I struggled to try to think of comparisons for those folks who don't know it. I mean, they're double bass, but they're not exactly girls against boys. They definitely have listened to hardcore, but you don't compare them to Black Flag. So, but they're melodic, they're angsty, but they're definitely, they're not grunge. It doesn't sound like Nevermind when you listen to that album. So I'd say anybody, listen to the first minute of Kill Your Television. And if you like that, pretty on point for the rest of the album. The other one I thought of, and it's another one where I struggle to think of at least of a contemporary comparison, is Barbara Manning, where you might know her from the No Alternative compilation. Got billed as Barbara Manning and the San Francisco Seals, which was a band she ended up joining for a couple of years in the mid-90s. She had a couple albums that they're now available as a double, but the one from 91 is One Perfect Green Blanket, and it's with the double with their 89 release, and I think it's most like, in terms of newer bands, it sounds like Courtney Barnett but without the cheekiness, or maybe it's really like Charlie Vox, even maybe in terms of a really newer band, Harmony Woods. Just like lo-fi indie singer-songwriter isn't quite the right way to do it, but she's got just kind of a quirky college rock thing going.
I don't remember. I have to go back and look at that comp. I don't remember her from that.
Yeah, it's Joed Out was her, or maybe it's Joeyed Out. I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced. Joed Out on the No Alternative comp.
I feel like I need to represent our friend Richard Waterman and nominate Badlands Voodoo Highway. I love that record. I know he loves it. He was up for a vote a couple of months ago. It got a couple of votes, but it is just like, maybe to Eric's point, like a band that was cast in a certain way. Like, hey, why don't you guys be like kind of like Bon Jovi? And I think they just wanted to be like, I don't know, just a 70s rock band, like blues rock band, like a Led Zeppelin kind of thing. Yeah. And I think by this point they were just like, didn't know what to do with them. They just said, go make a record. And they just made an awesome, raw, timeless, just classic rock record. Sounds great. Performances are fantastic. That was one I had like, I remember at the time I was like, I don't know if this is going to be any good, because I kind of liked the first one, but I wasn't sure. So I bought it on a cassette and wore the cassette out and eventually got it on CD. But
do you still have the CD?
I do. Yeah.
Oh, that's on my, so I got the first one. I've been on the search for the first one. So for those of you who don't know Badlands, it's Jakey Lee from Ozzy's band. And his singer, Ray Gillen, stepped in for Black Sabbath for a little while. And Ray ended up passing away of AIDS. And the story goes, the story goes that he had sex with women knowing he had AIDS. And so a lot of these women and their families have sued his estate. And so again, the story, the rumor is that they won't re-release any of the albums because the families are blocking that. So like if you have the CDs, they're worth a lot of money because you can't get them. And that's a band that I look in every thrift store. I look everywhere I can, hoping that it ends up somewhere because they're so hard to find. And I found the first one for $5 at a little record store up near Ohio Wesleyan. It was one of those times. I don't know if you guys, I am assuming you're all such passionate music fans that you do the same thing I do. Like I go to every record store I find, and I was flipping through and I always look for Badlands. And I had that split second where I thought I was on like, man, I'm dating myself, Candid Camera, that I was being punked. because I pick up the CD and I know how hard it is to get, and it's got a $5 sticker on it. I'm like, this has got, they must have meant $50. Somebody, well, I'm going to take it up to the counter, throw it down, and he's going to go, oh wait, no, that's a misprint. It's $50. And I got it for $5, and I walked out, and I'm like, I kept looking over my shoulder like he's going to chase me down, and he didn't. So I got it for $5. I've been looking for years, because I was like you, or Jay. I had them on cassette, and I still have the cassettes, but I don't have the CDs.
Yep.
Was that at Pat's?
It's now called Endangered Species.
Endangered Species, yeah. Yep. I know where that place is.
So to the point of Gem Records, this is another band I know I talk about a lot. So Driving and Crying from Atlanta. It's been reviewed on the show. This is their lead singer's album, McDougal Blue. What happened is the president of the label said, you guys need to stop doing all this folk and country stuff on your records. I'll tell you what, I'll let you do a solo record where you can do all that stuff, so that your next record is just going to be all the hard rock stuff we're going to try and sell. So in January of 91 is released Fly Me Courageous, which is their most successful commercial record, which they snuck one or two kind of slower tracks in on this record. But they have a pretty big hit with the title track. They have a bigger hit with a song called To Build a Fire, which I have a single for here. And this also has some live versions and some stuff off of their earlier albums. Now, their previous album had been produced by Peter Buck of R.E.M., who'd played on it and was friends with them. They were, they had ties to the Black Crowes, who are about to blow up. And they're a band that's being pushed as a metal band because that's what's selling. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of the year, all of the stuff they've been doing for 4 albums becomes massively huge. But because their label has spent so much time and energy pushing them as this current, 1990 hard rock band, they kind of fell by the wayside. There's a pretty good documentary called Scarred But Smarter, which is titled the first album, that's really focused on the band's history and them landing on the side of the fence that they didn't expect to be on in this whole change. Now, fast forward.
Can you open the, is there a picture of the band?
I'm sure there is.
Because I remember getting into them because they looked like a bluesy metal band.
So this is the picture on the liner notes.
I mean, that could be Danger, right? Yeah. Could be a hair metal band. I mean, and I think it attracted me to them.
But this album art is completely, alternative. So flash forward to about 2 years ago, and one of the biggest selling artists of the 1990s has a massive hit covering one of their songs. So Darius Rucker covers one of their songs about 2-3 years ago and has a massive hit with it.
Oh, I didn't know that,
This is another example of the labels not knowing what to do, not seeing the opportunity that they literally had in their stable, out touring this massive record that hit in the beginning of the year, and just everything falls apart for them for a lot of reasons. But the upshot is they're going today. They're still a great band. But I think that Fly Me Courageous, which is not my favorite of their records, the one before this, Mystery Road, is a hidden gem that I think a lot of people should check out. And in addition to being a great record, it also is a good example of that bridge between what was popular at the end of the 80s and what became popular in the 90s.
They were interesting because at least in, I don't know if your local radio for everybody here what it was like, but in Cleveland it was very aligned to like what you would see in Rolling Stone. Like if Rolling Stone would write about the band, then the radio stations would play them. So that means like radio actually wouldn't play Motley Crue or Kiss, or like they wouldn't play the stuff on MTV really. I mean the glam metal stuff, pop metal stuff. They would play like U2 or Bruce Springsteen or that sort of thing. So it was like very much like if Rolling Stone didn't approve it, we're not. But for some reason that band got through. And I remember that, almost to Chip's point about seeing them and seeing the video and like, oh, these kind of look like the other bands, but like, why are they getting played on the radio, but like Bang Tango doesn't? Because to me, I don't hear at that time, I'm like, what's the difference? But like for whatever, they had a credibility. I mean, now I can understand a little bit better, but at the time it didn't seem that different. But I do remember that, again, being one of those bands, kind of like the Black Crowes, like when you first heard them, like, this is different. And yeah, it had that Southern bluesy country thing going on, which maybe if that record comes out after Uncle Tupelo's record later on in the year, or there's more momentum around the all country thing, that suddenly all that makes more sense than it did for them in January.
I heard somebody mention.
I was just going to say, speaking of Uncle Tupelo, Jay, Uncle Tupelo took the opportunity when they were starting to get some publicity to basically torpedo themselves. And they made an like all acoustic folk traditional record as opposed to following up on their like, Johnny Cash meets Dinosaur Jr. sound, when they could have streamlined that and maybe gone a little bit more, not commercial, but just inched more towards college radio. And they started covering like songs that were sold. They don't have songwriter credits. They're just like traditional songs. And they're singing about like atomic power and Satan. And they're singing, songs by, folk artists from the 1920s, and doing it with no electric guitars, just acoustic guitars, and just absolutely going against the mainstream. So that was it was an interesting choice on their part.
I feel like 91, the overarching theme was new bands breaking into the popular consciousness that had a brand new sound like Nirvana or Pearl Jam, or it was established bands making some kind of hard left turn or doing something differently, like U2, for instance, or R.E.M. Often Baby was such a weird thing to follow up Joshua Tree and Rattle and Hum with. And R.E.M., even though they were, a sizable, respected act at that point, Out of Time, like, if I'm remembering correctly, was their first, like, it was the first one that felt glossy to me. Because I remember, my dad playing that album and hearing stuff like Shiny Happy People, which admittedly is like kind of I don't want to say it's a joke song, but it was a sort of a theoretical exercise. R.E.M. writes a song for children. But that's very different from the R.E.M. that preceded up until that point.
Yeah,
they turned down the guitars and definitely picked up new instruments and
the mandolin.
Try to write more of a textured record.
Well, Metallica changed their sound.
Yeah.
I mean, they stopped writing 9-minute long, multi-movement epics, and made boogie rock, made butt rock.
They stopped writing about suicide and started writing about SIDS. So I mean. No, your point is, I'm joking aside, your point is well taken.
What records, let me ask a couple of folks. Johnny Hooper, do you have an overlooked record from 1991, something that you're like, I can't believe this didn't catch on?
Let's go
besides Road Apples.
Well, okay, we'll come back to Road Apples later. Neil Young and Crazy Horses, Weld. I feel like one of the best live records I certainly own. It's got incredible performances of all these stellar songs. The production is first rate. Weld, people. Another one I'm going to go with is obviously Jesus Lizard's Goat. Please, are you kidding me? Noise rock at its finest. Bandwagon-esque. Seriously.
That's an interesting one, because is that overlooked? I feel like it has sort of rebounded in the popular consciousness.
Didn't that win like album of the year or something?
Yes. Didn't Spin give it to him?
Yeah, it's Spin.
Yeah.
But what were the sales like in the US?
Well, it came out in November, so they couldn't have been great. I mean, by the time they did that.
Right.
I remember very, very clearly, just because everybody expected like, oh, there's all this new music, and we're all like, oh, it's going to be Soundgarden or Nirvana. And it was like Teenage Fan Club. It's like, what? I mean, I'd heard it, but it was like, okay.
How about Blur's first record comes out in, I can't remember what month, but that's another big one.
So I would be curious to hear from maybe executives at some of these labels that start seeing Nirvana selling, and they're like, oh, you know that band from England that we weren't going to try and push in the States? Maybe we'll try it now. Or that little indie band we were going to try and grow over 3 albums, let's give them a big push.
Yep.
As opposed to those same label executives saying, how can we write off this Bang Tango record? Or, you know, what's the buyout on this, Mr. Big record?
I mean, keep in mind, all of these corporations run quarterly. So like at the end of that quarter, you're talking about, that record to come out in September, December or January, depending on what they use, is going to be the end of that quarter. Those are the bands they're going to be looking at to say like, okay, who's moving the needle? Where are we going to invest money this year? And yeah, I totally could buy that. It's an easy call. Like this stuff is selling right now, like a ton. We think we've got a bunch of other bands out there we haven't even tapped yet. Like, let's go down that road as opposed to continue to try to sell, Bang Tango's 3rd record.
But isn't that the story of 1992 that maybe we'll talk about in a year of, let's scoop up all these weird little indie bands and see if we can sell some Ween or some, the Reverend Horton Heat or whoever it is. And that's how we start getting, these little one-hit wonder one-offs from King Missile or, there's so many.
And like, if you think about like, we haven't talked about Guns N' Roses much, but that was a highly anticipated record, very successful. They toured, I don't know how long. It seemed like 5 years for that record.
So, and one of the things about Guns N' Roses, the story always was that it's a double album because the label was afraid somebody in the band was going to die before they could make yet another record. So they wanted to get as much music out of them as possible.
But they had become so grandiose. I think another way to think about it, if you're put your business hat on, it's like, am I going to try to create another Guns N' Roses? Like, that's not going to happen. Like, that took a ton of work. Now they're this other thing, like playing piano and writing 10-minute long songs and releasing double albums. Like, it'd be way easier to go sign a bunch of, lo-fi garage bands that are young.
So was the actual Cold November Rain really Nirvana?
The what?
The Cold November Rain, was that actually Nirvana coming in and washing it all away?
Metaphorically speaking, yes. Were there records that we know Chip talked about going to the midnight sale for Ozzy and Metallica. There are definitely records we anticipated, but were there records that you were anticipating and you were like, I can't wait to buy this, and then you actually got it, right when it came out, and you either immediately went, oh, this was a mistake, I didn't like this, or over time you've kind of changed your mind. Maybe you liked it at first, but now it's not become something that you ever revisit. Do you have any records like that from this era? And I will say, I did buy the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and now I'm not a big Red Hot Chili Peppers fan. I think I have that has soured for me.
I have both of those. Just to jump right on, number one, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, I didn't like immediately. I was like, nope, pass. And it's like, what, 16 songs, 70 minutes. Anyway, but then I know this is going to be controversial with this crowd, but 11's Awaken a Dream, while I still think it has a lot of nuggets, songwriting wise, production wise, I was going to pick it for next week's review, and I just couldn't. It was just too, it just didn't, it was just too plinky.
It's that thin Jack Irons drumming.
Yeah. And so their next.
You have a thing for Jack Irons, Jay. You just hate him.
Man, he leaves a lot of open space. You got to fill it.
It's not the notes you play, it's the notes you don't play.
And I came to this podcast because I follow Alan Johannes on Twitter, and that's how I originally found this podcast. So I'm a big Alan Johannes fan and 11 fan, but that album, while I can still enjoy it, does not. It didn't age in 30 years for me.
No way. Gotcha. Awaken a Dream is nowhere near the next one. The self-titled. God, the self-titled's it's on my top 20 all time. absolutely love that record so much. I was going to mention Johnny mentioned bandwagon-esque. Also, I didn't want to lose my train of thought. That is like the weirdest that was so popular. I mean, when does Jangle Pop win album of the year, right? It's like they were just trying to grab someone else, some indie band that, I mean, they were just searching, right? It was like Jay said, they were just trying to figure out what this quarter's hot band was going to be, I think. Not that Teenage Fan Club isn't great. It's just that they latched onto the mainstream for that little bit of time was crazy. Just crazy.
I don't know if the first Saigon Kick, somebody mentioned them earlier, if it gets, you know, it was the second record that had the big hit, the big ballad.
Yeah.
I saw, you know, talking about the sea change and how everything was changing. I saw Rat play at the Cleveland Agora, which is about a 2,000, 3,000 seater maybe. It's kind of like comparable to the Newport in Columbus. You know, it's a old theater that holds definitely under 3,000, probably 2,000 maybe would be my guess. But Rat was supposed to headline like the local, like probably Richfield Coliseum, and they weren't selling tickets, and so they put him at the Agora and they sold it as like this special club show for this huge arena band. They're coming to play in your face, getting back to their roots. But the reality is I don't even know if they sold that show out. But Saigon Kick was a label mate and the record wasn't out, and they opened. And I remember the singer, we were so mesmerized because he was like, he looked and acted like Charles Manson. Like he was just like making weird faces and staring at people and getting in people's, it was like, you didn't want to make eye contact with him because you were afraid that like he was going to do something. I don't know. but I remember, you know, we talk about CDs and cassettes, and that was still the day where you could go, I think Jay mentioned it. You know, we had a ton of record stores at Ohio State, and they would always put out the promo cassettes. And I remember getting the Saigon Kick one for $3, and promo cassettes always came out early because they were for print reviewers to review and get in time for publication. So like advanced copies of stuff came out. I mean, I got that probably 2 or 3 months before it. And it was like, again, like striking gold. Like the record store should not have been selling it because it was a promo copy for in-store play, but they sold all their promo cassettes. And yeah, that album was that weird. It was that weird alternative metal that Rip talked about, right? It was definitely not hair metal, and it was definitely not alternative rock. It was somewhere in between. It was weird. But I think that one really sticks out. There's 2 other like genres that I wanted to at least throw out to everybody. There were a lot of bands that kind of came, like My Bloody Valentine kind of became like the bigger band, right? Of that kind of shoegazy kind of sound. But a lot of bands came out around that same time. I think My Bloody Valentine's the one that got the attention. But like in years after 1991, so I didn't discover any of this stuff in 91, but I started dating this woman in 92-ish who read NME and Melody Maker, and she was really into that music, and like I was not into it. So years later, like Swerve Driver, Chapter House,
Primal Scream.
Ride.
Yeah, like the Swerve Driver raise, like when I was writing for the college paper, they were being put, like we got a copy of that cassette every week from the label. And I remember we just had a stack of Swerve Driver cassettes. And like I didn't think it was anything I was into. So like it took me years to listen to that. So that's one genre, kind of the UK, kind of the shoegaze and stuff. And there's this genre that I want you guys to tackle sometime, are the bands of like the 70s and 80s who were trying to survive in the 90s. And so the bands that came out in 91 were not the names that you recognize, but RTZ, which was the guys from Boston, put out a record. The Storm, which was 3 of the original members of Journey with a different singer. Shadow King, which was Lou Gramm and Vivian Campbell, who was in Dio and Def Leppard. And then Foreigner put out a record with the first time that they put out a record with a different singer. And all those bands, I think they were still doing, all those records sound like the bands that they sounded like. But in the 90s, those arena rock bands, like they weren't, I don't think any of those records probably sold very well.
Was that the same time of the second Bad Company with a different singer?
I don't think they put anything out in 91, but yes.
I just remember like bands that were like big in the early to mid 80s. Yeah, would like trying to reinvent themselves in the early 90s with new singers or different names or different formations.
And even the sound, like the RTZ definitely sounds like Boston. The Storm kind of sounds like Journey. Shadow King was a little bit heavier than Foreigner. The Foreigner record actually sounds like Foreigner, but with a different singer. But I'm just fascinated by that kind of stuff. It's all that old, like what happens when the arena rock bands start playing clubs, and do they change their sound or do they stick with their sound, and who's going to those shows? Because I wasn't going to see those bands.
Well, yeah, it's like, it'd be tough enough. Imagine being like, oh yeah, everybody knows the Janie Lane Warren story, right? So imagine you're him. I think we've all like listened to that and thought, oh yeah, that's kind of crazy. But imagine if you were like Journey, right? So it's like the generation before that, where it's like, well, shit, now I'm 2 steps behind. Like, what the hell do I do? Like, how do we make this work?
Isn't that also the story of those 70s bands that weren't photogenic enough for MTV in the 80s? And, you know, anyone's playing the Eric's on the Show drinking game. This is also the era when we still have regional radio, where you can have a hit in a regional market. This is long before Clear Channel or Infinity or what Cumulus comes along and homogenizes everything across the country.
Yeah.
You know, this is also the era when college radio is going from this kind of hippie free format stuff to being basically a training ground for alternative radio DJs. And there's much more emphasis on structure. And now is the power pop show, and now is the alt country show, and now is the metal show kind of thing. So you're getting, I'm sure every big indie label had like 30 stations at, the state universities across the country that they could call and be like, so we want to push whatever local, whatever band in your local area. And we're, the 4 states around you, we're focusing on that. And then we're going to grow from there. So I think with some of these older bands that you're talking about, that while maybe nobody in LA wants to hear Journey anymore, but there's definitely somebody in South Dakota that does, or somebody in, like I said, I went to Lake Superior State University. That was on the Canadian border. And, they were playing, Kickstart Your Heart still, but we would also regularly hear the Eagles or Zeppelin or Deep Purple on those stations.
I think, so like, I don't know the history well enough to know if these bands were trying to reinvent themselves, but like, does anybody know who the Storm is? Right. The Storm, like I said, is Jonathan Cain, Greg Rowley, and Ross Valerie from Journey. So it's like 3 of the 5 original Journey guys. There's no Neil Sean. There's no Steve Perry. Steve Smith played drums on it, but they didn't use a Journey name. And so like, I don't know if they were trying to reinvent themselves or if they thought like, at least that point, like Journey's not going to sell any records in 1991. So let's not even try to use that name. Let's try to do something like I don't know the history of that.
Yeah.
Or Steve Perry still owned the Journey name and they were like, they can't use it anyway. I don't know if they tried to sell that record as featuring Journey members or whether they tried to go out on their own.
Well, no, it's interesting because there were some bands that did that were from that early 80s and mid 80s era that were able to sort of slip through. One of them being Van Halen. Now I know Whit, you said that Foreign Lawful Carnal Knowledge does not stand up.
Uh-oh. I don't really have any basis for that other than
I'm calling you out.
I don't, you know why I called it out is because I don't remember shit about it. It's not.
Pound Cake?
Oh God, the power drill thing, whatever. I mean, I just, it doesn't stand out like any of the other records do. I don't think OU812 is exactly groundbreaking either, but I don't remember anything about For Carnal, whatever.
I think it,
except the name. The name is memorable.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it. It's a clean show. I'm trying to keep it clean.
Yeah, there you go.
It was highly anticipated. I was a huge fan, right? So I was a huge David Lee Roth era fan, and I kept waiting for a Sammy Hagar record to be great. So I cut him slack every time. So that one at least sonically sounded better than OU812.
Yeah,
but I agree with time. A lot of that Sammy Hagar material does not age well. Like there's a couple songs here and there where you're like, oh, that's pretty cool, or musically it's cool, but often his lyrics are so terrible.
Like Van Halen, what's the popular song on that? Right Now? Is that the one that was such
which had a very useful video in that it's a like it was one of those videos that was a political socio comment of the time. So, and it's a little witty, it's a little smart, and so it was perfect for MTV to play during the day, constantly in rotation.
They just
it's not actually that good of a song. Like if you just listen to the song, it's not that interesting.
No, it's just
You know what?
people
You
get all
men-
wrapped up in the message, and it's just
Right.
it's just yawn.
You
know,
mentioned
but-
that song, and I have flashbacks to the rec room at my freshman college dorm that had the one TV with MTV on it, and seeing that video over and over.
Mm-hmm.
So
Did they
this
use
is-
that for Crystal Pepsi?
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a Pepsi. This is a theme, right? Like the shared music that Tim had to listen to in the senior lounge, the rec room for Eric, right?
Yeah.
Like this is kids. You don't understand what it was like to have to share the common airwaves, the sound waves in the room with
It's
your
true.
fellow classmates.
That's
Now you can just put
100%
your
right.
AirPods in and
So
you never have to deal with anybody else's music.
But
Following
that's a bad thing. That is a net negative. in
So
the
follow-
long
Get
run.
off my lawn.
following on Chip's comment, here's an album I did not expect at all to talk about. Released on the 4th of February, 1991, the final album from the band Queen,
Yeah.
Innuendo. So one of my best friends is a massive Queen fan, so I definitely heard this album. And, then we finish out the year with the huge concert, tribute concert to Freddie Mercury. So that, I mean, maybe more than any other band that was going to be challenged in the 90s, circumstances forced Queen to go out on a high note, if you will. Forgive the illusion. But yeah, I mean, there's an album that people don't talk about, but I don't remember it being bad. It had good singles from it. But it's definitely, capping off a career.
Well, and then also in February of '92, right around the corner is Wayne's World. So there's
Yeah.
sort of like a Queen era at the beginning of the '90s.
And Bill and Ted's, and there's like
Yep.
movie soundtracks and it's like
Yep.
intertwining of that. But yeah, I definitely remember that Queen record. I remember it just being remarkable that they made it because I think it was pretty well known at the time that he was just not well.
So
Right.
I'm also going to think that was maybe a record where they were like, we're going to do whatever we want because Freddie's almost done. So we don't need to listen to the label. We don't need to worry about.
Right.
I think what's amazing to me is I'm a huge fan of the band. So like when I think back at that time, if you would have told me at that time, I mean, they were considered old, right? I mean, in 91, people were like, oh, they're an old band. Like they're probably going to retire soon. Like, and then when you find out he's sick, it's like, okay, well, they're definitely done. You're never going to hear any more Queen. To think in 2020 or 2019, they were still touring the world successfully and like playing those songs in a respectable way. Like that's mind blowing. Just from an age standpoint, to have thought at that time, if you told me in 30 years this band is going to somehow continue to tour and put on a great show.
It seems like they've always been a part of the cultural conversation for some reason, whether it was in movies, and then also weren't they a part of Rock Band? Didn't they have songs on Rock Band? I feel like a lot of bands got a second life because of Rock Band. When we ever get to the 2000s and talking about different years in the 2000s, when that podcast launches, we're going to have to talk about the influence of MTV and radio on breaking bands is going to be just as important as revigorating bands thanks to, and video games. Honestly, like the first time I ever heard the Hives was in a video game. It was in like a Madden football game. It wasn't because of the radio.
Yeah.
So that'll be an interesting when we get to those decades.
We were talking about I think it was Jay or Eric, one of you guys talking about how the record company started like cycling out the stuff that wasn't selling and realizing that hair metal was, I think 92 was probably, there were still a couple bands in 92 putting out kind of their last major label record. So 92 really seems to me to be the year, but the one from a pop metal perspective that I still love from that era that definitely got lost in the shuffle was Danger Danger Screw It. Is that the name of the record?
Is it the second record?
Yeah. Now I got to look it up because
I only know the first one.
The second, I mean, those guys go for the everything they write sounds like they want to be opening for Def Leppard or Bon Jovi. Like it's big hair. It's
While you look at, I don't mean to interrupt, but while you look it up, I feel like there's still a lot of really good stuff in hair metal going on in 1991. I mean, we had I'm not familiar with that Danger, but we talked about it Enough's Enough. Bullet Boys had a good album that year.
Oh, yeah, Freak Show.
And Bang Tango, Dancing on Coals, I think is a fine record as well.
I listened to both
again,
of those.
It's just this amalgamation of weird stuff going on in there.
Dick Tracy.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of
No more
stuff
rules.
that was good, that just wasn't reinventing the wheel and wasn't contributing to the conversation that was being had at that moment, that conversation being dictated by, steered by grunge. So if you had great hair metal albums, or in my case as a power pop fan, if you have a record like Blow Up by the Smithereens, which suffered the great misfortune of being released 2 weeks prior to Nevermind, a power pop band's like their attempt at being the least edgy they've ever been, the most glossy and produced. Those are genres that sort of by virtue of how they do themselves are preclude too much innovation. Like I feel like power pop didn't figure out how to really reinvent itself until after Nirvana. Like you wouldn't have even, for instance, a Fountains of Wayne or an Owsley or any of these second wave power pop bands if you didn't have Nirvana's influence. They would just fall flat on their face.
The Posies.
Yeah, right. So like they needed that sort of rough around the edges integration into their sound to re-enter relevancy. At the time, they were just trying to hang on. How do you maintain maybe you're not gaining fans, but you're maintaining your base?
You can kind of hear that with Material Issue, can't you? Like, because that record was released in January, I think. And it's a lot.
Yeah,
you could hear them having, like, in a post-Nirvana world, that record having a different edge.
Is that the one that has Are You a Boy or a Girl on it?
I think that has, isn't that Diane on it? Isn't that
Diane,
International
okay.
Pop Overthrow?
I get them confused.
I think that's International Pop Overthrow.
Valerie Loves Me.
Oh, okay.
Valerie, yeah.
Yeah, Valerie Loves Me.
That's it. That's the one.
I think this all plays back into what I was saying at the very beginning about the Galactic Cowboys and the marketing of the songs, because so many of those hair metals albums really wound up being great, like glammy power pop records, but the singles that they were pushing invariably were these power ballads, which were just overblown and overplayed. And I think that if some smart executive had been like, hey, this is really great, like grungy, dirty sounding, and not grungy like Seattle, but like not perfectly produced, like pop song on this Poison record or this, Motley Crue record or Danger or whoever, that they could have pushed a lot more units of a lot of those records and just said, guys, get rid of the hairspray, just put, dress like in your jeans and your leather and focus on, these songs that you're already writing that are talking about the environment or that are talking about addiction or teenage angst that we haven't been pushing.
It's funny that you mention that, because now that I think about it, there's such a commonality between like hair metal and power pop, and you wouldn't think that it's there, but it is. The straightforwardness of the melody, the lyrical subject matter that's kind of horny and boneheaded. They both were kind of gauche in the 90s. They felt dated. And I think Tim, was it you who said you got the Doug Broad book that was just published on Kiss, Cheap Trick?
Jay was listening to that.
Yeah, I'm listening to it now. Yep.
Yeah, and Stars and Aerosmith. Like that centering of melody that ultimately has its roots, even if the instrumentation is more aggressive and louder, in like 60s Beatles pop harmonies. There's an overlap there that I would, if I had fewer glasses of red wine, I would like to speak more eloquently about on some future.
I think all those bands that you're talking about, they all go back to Cheap Trick, Kiss, and Stars, and like those bands of the 70s that did very much meld and kind of form power pop, and then it broke into these other things depending on like, you know, what vein of it you were into. And sometimes, I mean, Enough's a good example of a band that put it back together again. But
how many stories have you heard? I don't know if you guys saw the Bee Gees documentary, but and they said something in that I think I've heard Warrant. I've heard so many stories about this over the years of sending a single to a radio station without labeling it, and then getting the feedback. And I think Warrant was one, right? When like the Dog Eat Dog record, which was a little bit heavier for Warrant, it's always considered Warrant's grunge album, which I don't hear that, but I think for the non-fans maybe it is. But like they send out, you know, Machine Gun as a single, but they didn't say it was by Warrant. It just said, we're working this new band, check it out. And these you know, the story is always at the radio stations like, we love this. And then they're like, oh, you know, that's Cherry Pie Warrant. And like, oh, wait. Oh, no, I didn't know that was the same band. Like, and they talk about that in that Bee Gees documentary too, how they were just sending stuff out because they didn't want reputations to precede the influence and the thoughts and opinions around a song. So, Eric, I think to your point, like sending out some of these songs that could have been and should have been hits, but maybe they had some baggage behind them just because it was that band or whatever.
I think like Tesla was pretty popular in '91, weren't they?
Yeah.
Like, is it the 5-band acoustical jam era?
No, I think it. Yeah,
it's Psychotic Supper.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were all over the radio, so they were kind of an oddity.
Yeah, that record came out a month before. It came out in August.
Okay.
It might be one of their best. But then they did the acoustic thing, which took off in a whole different way.
That was the whole MTV Unplugged craziness that went on, right? That was part of that, I would imagine.
But to go back to reading about bands, like they were a band, like I remember I probably read about them for at least a year, if not 2 years before I ever heard them.
Yeah.
Because they would just be written about like in Rip or whatever. Like everybody would always write about them because they were known for like not having an image. They were like the first band to didn't care what their image was. And that was like the storyline that everybody would write about them. And I would just imagine what they sounded like. I was like, oh, they must be so cool because they don't care. You couldn't listen to them. Like there was no listening boost. I didn't know a friend who had the CD.
I think I heard that they're like, I remember a story that their lead singer, Tesla's lead singer, he used to drive his semi truck and he'd practice singing or something like that, and that's how he got to be such a great singer or something like that. Some crazy story like that.
As a matter of fact, you were mentioning power ballads earlier. When I put out the power ballad book in 2013, I interviewed Jeff Keith for a podcast. I did a short run podcast for the book, and he mentioned that he would sing in a whatever truck he was working in. Like it was a industrial truck, not a semi, but you know, like a backhoe. And that was his day job, and he would sing in the truck.
Thought I scooped you, Tim, but I guess not.
Yeah.
You guys know just a little Tesla trivia. If you know Tesla, do you know the song Little Susie?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Yeah.
Did you know that's a cover?
No. Why'd you do that? I didn't want to know that.
I think I learned that last year.
Jeff dropping the so did 5-man acoustical jam come out in 91, or it was just in the top 200 in 91?
I'm looking. That one didn't come on my radar.
I'm seeing 1990 that came out.
So maybe it was late 90 and then it charted in 91, which is another weird phenomenon.
Yeah, it came out on the 13th of November.
Is this part of the whole, what's my timeline? Like I lump that in with the Mr. Big and the Extreme and the like clapping and the black.
It was
and
90. I think that was 90.
Yeah.
And some of those songs like Silent Lucidity, and a lot of those like later power ballads, I think carried over from 90 through the year, even though they weren't released. Sure. We're not talking about them, but
the album got released in 90, but the single got released maybe in 91.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were all
late
over radio.
Late 1990 on Signs.
This is also part and parcel of growing that song from a region to like 2 regions to 3 regions, and then the promotional time had a much longer tail, and I'm sure had, you're going from, we'll do this section, these guys are already big in Pacific Northwest, so we'll do that, and then we'll bring in the inner mountains, and then we'll bring in the plains, and we'll try and break them in Georgia, and then eventually, it grows so big that the rest of the country can't ignore it.
Right. Jay, you mentioned about the first half of the year sort of being a different period from the fall. One of the records, when I was looking back at this timeline, that I remember the videos on MTV, and I remember this sort of like weird, there was a starting to getting a vibe of like, of a nostalgia for the 60s and 70s. You had like Dazed and Confused and stuff. And one of the artists who was sort of riding that was Lenny Kravitz. And he had Mama Said came out in April of 91. And I remember the video for Ain't Over Till It's Over. And like not really knowing what that was. Like that was such a weird song compared to, what was big, which was EMF and in terms of videos on MTV. And then you had like Jane's Addiction had a video on MTV and that stuff. And this is like this string driven soul song essentially. And I remember getting the record and like Slash plays on Always on the Run. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. Slash is playing on this song. Is this alternative? Like it was such a weird boundary crossing record. And he seemed like built for MTV, like just like incredibly good looking guy, plays guitar, dresses cool, cooler than anybody you've ever seen. And, has
I actually want to leave the call right now and listen to that guitar solo, by the way.
You're making me want to listen to that record.
Oh my God, that guitar solo is so awesome. Oh man.
Yeah. And I don't feel like I, for me personally, what happened with Kravitz with like the American Woman and that song, like all over radio, just murdered my appreciation for him. That I feel like I need to revisit some of those records. And then, like following, like, what's this, 91 and then 92, Are You Gonna Go My Way comes out. So he immediately follows it up with a massive record that sold like multiple millions of copies thanks to that single.
Yeah, but he just got a rap as like, oh, he's just so derivative. That was the big thing then. As soon as he got popular, people started saying, all the critics said, well, he's just doing the same old stuff everybody else has been doing, and there's nothing original, and he got screwed.
Did they say that shit about the Black Crowes?
Yeah, no. Well,
no, awesome. Because
nobody says that about the white artists.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's different there?
I was gonna say that's bullshit.
In the beginning, I remember a lot of people, bagging on the Black Crowes for, ripping off the blues. And, in the very beginning, there was a lot of people that were talking about.
Also, a bunch of shitheads. Like they're just obnoxious people.
It was a lot of Rolling Stones. Like they're just a wannabe Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
Was a lot of that. They've listened to what's the record? I don't think Sticky Fingers, over and over again, and they've made this, and their first single is a cover of an Otis Redding song.
So the other thing is that this is an era, believe it or not, listeners, if you weren't there, when the Beatles and the Stones were not as revered as they are today, where, across not with the exception of their original fans and a hardcore fan base, they were not the anointed, kings of rock and roll that they are today.
They weren't as active, right? I mean, the Stones didn't release anything on here.
But they were, in a lot of ways, they were seen as the, music for boomers. That was a lot of in the end. Now there were a lot of fans, and there were a lot of Gen Xers who listened to those bands, but they were not the ultra revered.
So they were to you guys what like How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb U2 was to me and my cohort when I was, in high school.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Like I eyed with some measure of suspicion. Although
because
you too.
I had a discussion with a friend in college. We were both King's X fans, and he's like, "Well, King's X isn't popular because they sound too much like the Beatles, and people don't like the Beatles these days."
weren't the Beatles putting out those rarities records, like the double albums where they were like basically writing new songs around vocals?
That was a few years later.
Oh, it was a few years later.
Yeah.
But to Eric's point, I think there was a gap there where it was
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, this stuff's not cool anymore. And then there became an appreciation of like, no, it is cool. But like between like, I mean, if you even look at, I'm looking at the Rolling Stones catalog, they didn't do anything between 89 and 94. And I don't think the Beatles catalog was being touched. I think maybe they did like past masters at that time, like maybe some remastering of things, but like
Well, a
there
lot was
wasn't
getting shifted over to CD.
Yeah, there wasn't like any curation of the catalog or keeping the band out there. And I also think culturally there was this transition. It felt like it was going on.
I remember hearing ads for like Beatles 7 inches on talk radio. Like it was a weird time.
Yeah, and with the Stones, I presume it was still touring. I mean, my first ever concert at age 6 was, I think, Voodoo Lounge. It may have been. It was that or Steel Wheels. I don't know what. No, Steel Wheels was accompanied with an album release, wasn't it?
That was 89.
Steel was 89.
And Voodoo Lounge was 94.
And Steel Wheels was roundly joked about by late night television host comedians because of how old these guys were.
That's right.
I don't even think that, I mean, this is a period of time where I don't know that even Zeppelin was cool anymore. Like there was a little span there. It was like Pearl Jam, right? I mean, notoriously their first record sounds more like Zeppelin than it does what they sound like now. And I think even they were like, no, we want to sound like Neil Young, not Zeppelin. Like, whatever. We want to sound like Fugazi, not Zeppelin. So there was definitely a period in there was like rejection of the 70s until we got a couple years through it. And then it was like, oh no, Kiss is cool now. And Cheap Trick is cool. And Page and Planet are out touring. That's kind of cool. And like all that stuff got re-kicked kind of back into the being acceptable, I guess.
So what's crazy is box set? Is that what it was? It's like 90. Is that 92 when the Zeppelin box set came out? Because I mean, we were talking about Stairway to Heaven had staying power.
92 or 93 was that 4 CD box set.
Yeah,
that was a key. Yep.
I think
that was also the era of the Aerosmith box set came out, and that was really big in with the college crowd.
Pandora's Box.
Yeah,
I love that box set.
So
that's 91. Yeah.
What's crazy is in looking at this top Billboard albums of top 200 of 91, how many of the albums came out in 90, which shows you the power of MTV and radio singles, right? Like Warrant's Cherry Pie on this list is number 21, and that album came out in September of 1990. But Cherry Pie, the single, came out. What other singles were on that? That's one of my favorite records. I can't even think of.
I Saw Red on that one. Was Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Oh yes, yeah.
I have a very distinct memory of going to my college orientation and the guys across the hall from me blasting that over and over all night long.
So again, having to listen to other people's music.
But they're like a top, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, they're probably a top 5, maybe a top 3 band for me ever.
How long was that charting?
What's that?
How long were you saying that was charting?
Well, I mean, it was number 21 album of 1991, and it came out in September 1990, which means it sold enough copies. I'm sure it sold out of the gate. It sold a ton of copies in September through December, but then to sell that many more to end up at number 21, you had to have been pushing singles hard and pushing touring hard and pushing MTV, like that Uncle Tom's Cabin video probably. I don't remember how the flow went, right? But Cherry Pie was a single, and they probably rode that through the end of the year, and they probably did a tour around that song, and then they come into the new year, and like for the next quarter, it's going to be Uncle Tom's Cabin, and then go out on a headlining tour. I mean, I saw that tour that summer. Now that I think about it, it was a triple bill with Trickster and Firehouse, and they played at Blossom, and it sold out in like 10 minutes.
Don't Treat Me Bad. What a song.
For those people listening, you should put this in the show notes. There's a link. We've linked to a Billboard.
It's crazy. The Razor's Edge is number 12. I mean, I don't mean to get hung up on this list, but that's nuts.
Queensryche at number 9.
That was 1990.
It's just funny.
And I love that album. Don't get me wrong. And once again, that's another metal band that was talking about the environment and talking about, youth issues and angst and all of those other things.
Law enforcement. I mean, God, listen to that song now, and it's like, oh God, listen to it in the wake of the summer protests, and it's just atrocious.
But again, that's a huge carryover because that came out in 1990, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was my second. So I interviewed Joey Ramone first, and then Michael Wilton from Queensrÿche second, and that was spring quarter, right? So 5 months into the new year is when like Silent Lucidity became the hit single, and again, it rode them into the top 200 albums of the year, even though the album was at that point 6 months, 7 months old.
Do you remember what their next release was?
Jet City Woman.
Was it Promised Land?
No.
Album
It was Operation Live Crime, which was a box set, live CD and video of them doing their Operation Mindcrime record, which once again is another record talking about corruption in institutions and drug addiction and all of this stuff that all of those other Seattle bands were talking about.
A question for people who actually lived it.
Old people, you mean?
Well, yes, for the old people. How bifurcated was the US and UK market? I mean, for me, my huge 1991 album, second to School of Fish, is Screamadelica. And I'm wondering how on everybody's radar that was, or how much Manchester and the points where rock music was starting to intersect with dance music as it really was in the UK scenes. Was that something that was getting attention? Was that something that you guys remember clearly?
Yeah, I kind of remember not liking Jesus Jones or EMF, but I liked the Happy Mondays. Remember that song Step On?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that, and I think I was all over the Soup Dragons for whatever reason. But I think it was in that weird spot, just like hair metal. It was like it kind of came and went right at the beginning of '91, I think, if I recall. But that's
I felt like it was.
I was buying that stuff before the whole grunge
I think
thing
the
broke.
Charlatans were already like I can't remember when The Only One I Know came out. But
it's 1990.
So that was already out there.
My experience was for that type of stuff, you could get exposed to it through MTV, but at least my local radio was not touching anything like that.
Yeah. Following on that, I was going to say 120 minutes was really the thing.
Yeah.
120 minutes was where you would see British bands, except for the metal bands, and you would see that the night before on Headbangers Ball.
I will say I pulled up a Modern Rocks track Billboard chart from the week that Nirvana's Smell Like Teen Spirit went #1. It actually went #1 in November. So just after the record came out. Would the record came out the 17th or the 24th, Jay?
24th.
So on the 23rd, the chart for week ending November 23rd is when Smells Like Teen Spirit went to #1 on the Modern Rocks track, which is compiled from commercial radio and college radio. #2 was Moving On Up by Primal Scream. Now, I don't remember that. Like, I don't remember a video. I wasn't in college yet. Maybe it was played on 120 minutes. Mysterious Ways by U2 was #3. I totally remember that.
Yeah.
Give It Away by the Red Hot Chili Peppers is #4. There's No Other Way by Blur was #5. And this is in the US. This is a US chart. Then there was a band called The Shaman, and they had a single at #6 called Move Any Mountain. I don't know what that is. I've never heard that. In Excess,
I think it's Manchester.
Okay.
So like in the vein of Primal Scream.
In Excess's Shining Star was #7. U2's The Fly was #8. So they had 2 in the top 10.
U2 had 2 songs in the top 7. Wow.
That album was ginormous. Yeah.
That was in my opinion, still the best album of 1991.
Erasure's Love to Hate You was #9, and then #10 was the Pixies' Letter to Memphis. That's your top 10 the week that Nirvana goes #1. And also in that top 15 was The Globe by Big Audio Dynamite, which again I know they were an established band. They were not a new band at this point. Although this is Big Audio Dynamite 2, not Big Audio Dynamite. This is the sequel band. But I placed them in the same vibe as Jesus Jones, as Soup Dragons, EMF, KLF, all those bands. And I honestly, I heard that through friends. Like, I don't remember the radio playing that because I lived in a suburb of Cleveland at the time. But I remember, and I've joked around with Jay about this. I had a friend who had a 1991 red Fiero, Pontiac Fiero, and he would pop the K-singles in, and he had like the K-single for Jesus Jones, the K-single for EMF, and that's what we worked at a grocery store together outside of high school.
Wait. So he was like, you'd have to put that tape in, listen to the one song. Would it auto flip, or you'd have to pull it out, put another song in?
Yeah. See, well, it was a single, so you'd pop it out.
Was that your job as the passenger to swap the cassette?
Dude controlled his radio. Let's put it that way. He did not.
A lot of work. I never bought the cassette singles, but I'm just thinking about that, like trying to drive around. Every song you have to take the tape out and put another one in. That's insane.
Think about the stupidity of singles of one song. Yeah. By the way, I do have the Silent Lou City single down in my basement. Just saying.
I might have the Jet City Woman one around here somewhere.
Yeah.
But you got to dub all those on a 90-minute Memorex.
Yes, exactly. That's the way to go.
So in prep for this, I did a glance at 1991 and like an album, a band to me that was sort of a 1, 2, 3 hit wonder, but whose album, oh boy, I'm gonna have to look up what year it was. They put out another record, the Thompson Twins.
Mm-hmm.
Right, they just had a couple singles, but they put out a record in 91, and like I was trying to find this record to talk about on this. That was like to me a surprise. Like I didn't even know that album existed in 1990. I think it was called Queer. I knew nothing about that record, but I've been listening to it the last couple of days, and it's like I really like it. And they put out another record that I got for $1 at a used bin. I got to look what it was called, but I mean I like the Tom, even though I was a Headbangers Ball guy and a grunge guy. I was into whatever MTV was telling me I should be into. I did like singles. What is the route?
While you're looking that up really quickly.
Big Trash, 1989. Sorry.
Okay. Speaking of new wave bands putting out albums in 1991, one of my favorites, Men Without Hats, put out a record that where they're known as this great kind of fun synth pop band. Personally, I think they're more like a lighter Canadian Devo. They put out a guitar heavy like rock record that they say was inspired by what they were hearing come out of the Pacific Northwest. It really didn't do much and lost them their deal with their label. That it's not a great record, and it's not one that I've necessarily gotten into, but it's one that I'm always interested in re-listening to try to like decode where they were going after, doing things like Pop Goes the World,
Right.
It's one of those, how did this happen?
Yeah. Jay, you mentioned the Pandora's Box, and I completely forgot that this happened, but Sweet Emotion was a single that year. Like, because of Pandora's, it made it in the top 40 again in modern rock radio because of that Pandora's re-release, or Pandora's release and then the re-release of that single. So after they had just had multiple singles with Pump, Aerosmith was able to stay relevant up until the next when Get a Grip came out because of that box set.
Well, what's funny is that box set is all the Columbia material, so it doesn't have any of the stuff that was just a hit. So Columbia was able to like dip back in and say like, hey, thanks Geffen for making this band huge. We're going to come back and now resell all the old shit.
It was a way to sell all that stuff to Gen Xers who maybe didn't hear it. And
yeah. Like me, like I was like, got into them in the 80s, and then I had heard some of the Columbia stuff from the 70s, but like when I got the box set, I was like, this is literally everything. Plus all of the jam sessions and like just everything they had done on Columbia basically was just all on that box. So it was amazing.
And don't underestimate the impact that video had on that song being huge too, right? That was the one where it was like basically a phone sex call.
Was it?
That's my memory. Is that it starts off with somebody calling a fantasy, and then at the end it's some,
some woman at home, she's older,
that's right.
She's heavier than the fantasy, and she's got kids running around, and she's maybe ironing or something like that.
I forgot about that. They did a video for that. I want to throw some mentions out there from our folks on Patreon. Jay mentioned Richard Waterman bringing up Badlands. He also brought up some other favorite albums of 91: The Cult's Ceremony, Grunt Truck's Inside Yours, Honeymoon Suite's Monsters Under the Bed, In Excess, Live Baby Live, Junkyard, 6, 7s and 9s, LA Guns, Hollywood Vampires, Little Angels, Young Gods, The Orb, Adventures Beyond, Osric Tentacles, not familiar with that band, Stranglitude, Saigon Kick, School of Fish, The Scream, Let It Scream, Swerve Driver, Talk's Laughing Stock, and Violent Demise. Some of them I've not heard. Talk's one of those bands where I always think I got to go back and re-listen to more of their stuff because I've only given it a cursory listen.
Was the last one Violent Demise?
Yeah.
That is one. Am I allowed to say that I found it on a blog somewhere and I downloaded it?
Yeah, I mean,
I found it on a blog and I downloaded it. It is it's Oni Logan, who was in Lynch Mob, and Rowan Robertson, who was in Dio's band. He was like Dio's young hotshot guitar player after Vivian Campbell left. I read about it somewhere recently, and I don't know that it ever got released commercially.
Oh, so just like a promo release?
I don't know. Like I had never heard of it, and it might have been because it was kind of. I'm trying to look it up right now.
I think Richard might have slipped me that record too.
Maybe
but hey,
it's not
blog,
released,
so we're not.
Maybe I heard about it through you guys. I read about it not so long ago, and I was like, these are guys that are in bands that I know that I've never heard of the project before.
Some other ones from the Patreon page. Gabriel Gutierrez mentioned Jesus Lizard's Goat, as Mr. Hooper did. Also mentioned some great noise rock records that came out. Pistica by the Cows, the self-titled debut record by Unsane, King of the Jews by Oxbow, War on Everybody by God Bullies, The Unclaimed Prize by The Mark of Cain, who we've covered. Other notable releases: White Light from the Mouth of Infinity by Swans, 13-Point Program to Destroy America by Nation of Ulysses, and Steady Diet of Nothing by Fugazi. Some good picks. Carl F. mentioned that Out of Time is his favorite, but he gave a shout out to The Orb, which he found on Napster years later. He also mentioned, and this is not necessarily stuff that we cover, but this was a year where I started, I think, paying attention to more than just rock, and part of that was because of he mentioned D-Light's World Click, which Groove Is in the Heart was a huge single in this era. And you had a lot of the New Jack artists. Also, there's a great De La Soul record from this year. So there was a lot of cross pollination, and it also helped that I think this is the year of the crossover hit between Anthrax and Public Enemy, which made me go buy not the Anthrax record, but go buy the Public Enemy record as a 17-year-old kid who had no knowledge of either band. I went with the political hip hop artist from New York, and it made a big impression because I became a lifelong Public Enemy fan after that. Mike Bond mentioned some of the ones that we haven't talked about: Tad's 8-Way Santa, Throwing Muses, The Real Ramona, Primus, Sailing on the Sea of Cheese, The Wedding Presents, Sea Monsters, Slint's Spiderland, the self-titled album by Electronic, The Wonder Stuffs, Never Loved Elvis. He mentioned the Mock Turtles that you had mentioned earlier, Marissa. Babes in Toyland's To Mother, Massive Attack's Blue Lines, their debut record, Slowdive's debut record, Just for a Day, Hole's debut record, Pretty on the Inside, and Superchunk's No Pocky for Kitty, which of course we covered many years ago on this podcast.
Can we talk about Tad real quick?
Yeah.
I remember 92, 93, like every band that was in the press that had been accused of ripping off Nirvana was citing Tad, early Tad, as one of their bigger influences. And obviously that was also an influence on Nirvana.
Yeah. Yeah, they were definitely one of the bands that you would, when you read the article about any Seattle band, it'd be like, oh, you know, referencing either Tad or Green River.
You know, along the lines of Seattle bands, Love Battery put out Between the Eyes that year. That's another band that like I sort of missed because they were coming out at a time that I was just starting to like, you know, get between hair metal and alternative metal, and I wasn't sure what Love Battery was all about, but that's a band that I've gone back and sort of rediscovered that's really good.
As much as I would love to keep you guys here for like 6 hours and just keep talking about 1991, we are getting close to the 2-hour mark of talking here. So
it was that big a year.
And for those of us who have to go to work, you know, at their normal hour tomorrow on the East Coast, I want to release you at a decent time. So how about this? I'm going to go around the virtual Hollywood Squares here and say, give me your pick. You've got to present to an alien or a small child who's into music. What does 1991 sound like? Pick your album that you're going to say, this is what 1991 is for me. Scott, I'm going to start with you.
For me in 1991, it's 10, without question. I listen to 10 all the time.
Okay. Definitive. I like it. Eric, for you, 1991, one record.
Well, I guess I'm going to go with Driving and Crying's Fly Me Courageous.
There you go.
It covers all of the bases from everything that came before to alternative and what would come after.
All right. I like this diversity that we're already starting with here. Mr. Hooper, are you going to pop Robe Apples?
Next year.
Next year.
Jesus Lizard Goat. Just
Goat.
Pure noise rock at its finest. Musicianship top notch. Production by Steve Albini. Thank you very much. Goat.
So you're going to scare the aliens away with David
scared.
Yao's. Yeah, they're scared. They're terrified.
Around my house? No.
Marissa, what's your pick for 1991?
Prima Delica, because everyone should come to the realization, as I did, that rock and roll and dance music are the same thing. We want to be free to do what we want to do. We want to get loaded. We want to have a good time.
Awesome. Chip.
I'm going to go with one that I didn't even bring up. Fishbone's The Reality of My Surroundings. So that's another band that, like, you know, Rip Magazine introduced me. Scott Ian wore Fishbone t-shirts and Anthrax photos. And so I went out and bought it, and it's funk, it's R&B, it's soul, it's metal, it's hard rock, it's alternative. That album has two, to me, of their best singles, Everyday Sunshine and Sunless Saturday. And that's, of all the albums, besides Saigon Kick and Enough's Enough, that one, the Fishbone album, is one that I return to all the time.
Jeff, what is your pick for your 91 album?
So to answer your precise question about what would you show a small child, I bought 8 gig iPods for each of my kids shortly after they turned 6. And I gave them 3 albums from 1991. But if I have to pick my best, it's Nevermind.
What were the other 2?
Loveless and 10. And it's Nevermind is the one they gravitate towards. I mean, they like the even flow videos. It's perfectly fine to show 6-year-olds quite a bit of music videos, for the record. But yeah, they love Nevermind.
Interesting. Wit, what are you picking for your record for 91?
All right. I know it's supposed to be Nevermind, And I know I want it to be Trompe Le Monde, but that's not the Pixies' best record. So I'm going to go off the board and embrace my power pop loving innards and pick Matthew's Sweet Girlfriend.
Nice. Jay?
Well, I'm gonna caveat it. I think the record that sounds most like what's to come is Bad Motorfinger. I think the record I would pick to represent 91 is Temple of the Dog, because it's released in April to a giant WTF. Like, who are these guys? Who the hell's Andrew Wood? Why does any of this matter? Then Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all that happens. And all of a sudden it's, oh, wow, this is all on Soundgarden happens. Now all of a sudden it's completely relevant and a big deal and everybody cares.
I bought the Temple of the Dog CD because it had the stickers that features members of Mother Love Bone. And then I bought the Pearl Jam CD because it said features members of Mother Love Bone and Temple of the Dog. And then later the Temple of the Dog CD says features members of Pearl Jam. I was like, wait, what?
Well, I bought Temple of the Dog and Pearl Jam on compact disc at Tower Records on the same day, because they were both like $12.99 or something. And I take it up to the counter, and I'm probably 20 years old. And the 24 or 25-year-old woman at the counter just says to me, oh, so their records are so good, you can hear them mourning their friend. And it's like, this would not have happened 2 years earlier. People at the counter didn't care. We had no Tower Records. You know, the idea that a record that's a tribute to a fallen friend would even register was nothing.
And that's another one of the promo cassettes I bought at Used Kids Records in Columbus. I bought Temple of the Dog's promo advance cassette probably 3 months before it came out. And like, I don't even know if I knew who exactly was on it for sure. I can't remember that. I can remember buying the cassette early though. And like, it was like having this secret. There's no internet. So you weren't very few people had it. Yeah. And so like every time I was at a party, I'm like, oh, listen to this. Like, I remember like touting that one a lot before it came out.
And I also remember the Alice in Chains guys being on Headbangers Ball. There's an infamous episode where they go to a water park, and the last video they showed was Temple of the Dog. And I believe the Alice in Chains crew were the ones that managed to get that video on Headbangers Ball. And this, I think, was before the whole album broke. So there really was that kind of cohesive like mourning among this group of people, that it wasn't just, you know, the guys in Pearl Jam, or it wasn't just Chris Cornell. It seemed to be the whole community there.
And if you're interested in reliving that Alice in Chains water park, watch HBO's Class Action Park, which is a documentary about the park that uses a lot of footage of those guys visiting the park. It's pretty amazing. It's like, again, like that circle that Scott just described where you're coming back again. It's, wait a minute, this was an actual place. So.
Nice. All right. 2 hours. We should probably give our listeners a what?
Did you pick yours?
Oh, so if I'm being honest, the record I listened to the most,
Boys to Men,
in 1991, yes, Cooley High Harmony by Boys to Men. No, it was honestly Achtung Baby. I was totally entranced by the one video and song. Like I didn't know what I was like. What is this? This is so like simple, but it's like moving me in a way I'm not like comfortable with as a 17-year-old boy. And I just thought it was like, I got that record, I got that CD, and I was just like, there's so many weird guitar sounds, and it just was like mind-blowing, because I was not a U2 fan. I did not own the Joshua Tree. I didn't own any of the records before that. I knew the singles just from being on MTV, and that was the first record where I really was invested through the whole album. So it would be Achtung Baby.
That does sound like 91.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a cut and paste of all the different sounds of that time.
Yeah. What was that motion you were doing there, Scott? Were you you're muted, by the way.
Gesturing at someone off screen.
Oh.
Sorry, we're running up against bedtime. Cut this.
He's coming out of Four Seasons.
Yeah.
Is that your lawyer?
Little Rudy.
Rudy
Is
can't.
that little
better
Rudy?
hair. He's got way better hair.
His hair doesn't melt.
Hey.
So, Jay, you mentioned Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger.
Yeah.
I was listening to it this week. And back when we did the Nirvana Roundtable, I talked about how Teen Spirit starts off with this guitar part that sounds like a completely different kind of album.
Mm-hmm.
So does Bad Motorfinger.
Yeah.
It starts off little tinny, like throwback guitar thing, and then it kicks into what we know as Soundgarden. So maybe that's also a big part of 1991 that we don't talk about.
Look at what he's got. Look at.
Oh my God, what is that? Johnny's showing us what is that?
Look at all this Soundgarden love from
Soundgarden.
It's like it's part of the re-release that they issued a few years back, and this thing, it's a spinning wheel of the.
Oh my God! Oh, it's like the album cover thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so cool.
It's like a 3D version of the album cover art.
Yep. Coming at
That's really cool. That would have been also my nomination for the record. That, like, I liked it at the time. I didn't fully understand it. Like, I couldn't absorb all of it.
Right.
Taking me years and years and years of listening to that record to really like unpack everything that's going on and how amazing it is.
Yeah. All right, we got to wrap up because Scott's got to put his kid to bed. So let's. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined us. We will have more discussion, of course, at our Patreon page, at our Discord channels about 1991, the 30th anniversary of this very important year for our podcast. So if you want to join us at those locations, you just join our Patreon page for as little as $2 a month, and that's how you get to participate in those discussions, vote in the polls, help us pick records each month, help us decide the topics for our roundtables and our 80s episodes that are exclusive to our Patreon community. And then, of course, you can also read the box newsletter entries that go out to the email boxes of folks who sign up for it via digmeoutpodcast.com every week. Record reviews, 1-minute reviews of new releases relevant to the 80s and 90s, books, movies, and music. And if you like what you heard, leave us some feedback over at Apple Podcasts. Scott, Eric, Chip, Marissa, Johnny, Jeff, Whit. This camera, I'm doing a Hot Ones one here. This camera. No. Anybody watch Hot Ones? That's a great show on YouTube about celebrities eating really hot wings and crying. Usually crying is involved, except for Natalie Portman, who I think is a robot after watching her episode. She's clearly not a human being because she ate the hottest wings on earth and did not suffer at all. So I don't understand that. But thank you
Marty
all.
From Beautiful Girls?
Yes. She doesn't shed a tear. Like Gordon Ramsay is falling apart.
She told you she's an old soul.
She is.
Old souls don't cry. They can take the heat.
Gordon Ramsay was falling apart by the 6th wing, and she powered through 10 wings without shedding a tear. So she is an immortal. I don't know how she does it. Thank you all for joining us for this episode and spending your Sunday nights on this first January of 2021, which is sure to be a fantastic year after what we went through in 2020. So for all of us and Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.